All right, me. It is Friday, mid-November, maybe the 14th. It might be the 14th. But today, I finished reading Dan Brown's The Secret of Secrets. This is his newest published one, most recently published one, published in September of this year. So it's been out for a couple months. Fun book, right? As Dan Brown books usually are. There's some weird stuff in it, and it's like, I think it kind of circles back to a lot of different concepts and things that I've mentioned with other books. The first one being, I guess the first one to talk about is because it leads into the other ones, is continuity of characters and things, right? And writing a book series is very, very difficult. Especially a book series like this, right? Because even if we, in general, consider this to be easy reading literature, and serialized fiction like this, where it's generally considered to be a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to write, which is a whole other argument that exists. I'm not going to touch base on that. But right, the one big thing is that you have this continuity of characters, right? And one of the things that makes serialized detective type things work really well is that usually there's only like 2 or 3 main consistent staying characters, and then everyone else kind of cycles through, and it's the new person of the story. So like if you're talking about Sherlock Holmes, right, you have some main constantly staying characters. You have your Sherlock, you have your Watson, you have Detective Lestrade, who appears a couple different times, but for the most part, it's what's the investigation this week or for this piece. In James Bond, right, James Bond is your recurring character, but because of who the character is, right, you get to also invent this fictional existence of where James Bond is actually a code name and is used by a whole bunch of different other people, which is why it doesn't matter if James Bond looks different in movies, in different movies, or has different mannerisms in different movies, right? Because there's a much larger piece of fiction there that can be just kind of thrown away and imagined, right? But within this, right, you have Robert Langdon, who is this very consistent in how he's presented in things, right? But then you also have, right, he gets the James Bond treatment of new girl every book that he's attracted to or works with in some way. And we finally get a repeat, and it's the repeat of Catherine Solomon. And this eventually makes sense why I divulged on this path first. But we get a repeat of Catherine Solomon, who is also in The Lost Symbol, and she reprises her role here of being the main female sidekick for Robert Langdon, much more romantic and intimate than her appearance in The Lost Symbol. But then also it's very different because she's not the same person, right? In The Lost Symbol, she was like, same kind of deal where she was older than Robert Langdon, but had nothing to do with him. Catherine Solomon was a scientist and was doing experiments, and yada 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 yada. In this version, right, in Catherine Sullivan's appearance here in Secret of Secrets, right, she's still a little bit older than Robert Langdon. She's still a scientist, and her work is central to the plot of the story. But this time, like, her and Robert Langdon have this history with each other where they've been acquaintances, and like it's been like a will they won't they kind of deal, and that they are now finally romantically involved at this point in time. And it feels like a very, very strange twist to make, especially because like part of the whole deal with the lost symbol was that like Catherine was like the younger sister to someone that Robert Langdon looked up to or like was friends with. It was Peter Solomon. I don't remember exactly what that relationship was, but and so it was like it was just a very, very different character and experience. And then we get to this one of where it's like oh yeah, they've actually just known each other since they were 19 and 24 years old. And yeah, they've been good friends this whole time, actually. It's a very strange decision to make, especially because, like, I would argue in a lot of ways it doesn't really have an effect on the story, or what their bonds of trust would be. So I don't know why that decision was made. I don't know what's up with that. But going down that path, I think I looked up who Catherine Solomon was just because I was like, that the name sounds familiar within the story. I just don't remember who it is. And let me down reading some critiques, I'm going to say, of Dan Brown's work, which is, I mean, Dan Brown's work is inherently populist fiction, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being populist fiction. But the issue becomes this whole thing about how many Americans actually read. It's like 45% of American adults read no books a year. If you read 4 books in a year, you're in like the top 20%. If you read like 10 books in a year, you're in the top 10%. If you're me and you're reading right around 50 usually within the year, or I've been reading 50 for the past couple years, that puts me in like the top 0.5%, I think. And so like you have this issue where you have this populist fiction thing where you want people to read. I think Dan Brown is a fantastic way to get someone to read as an adult, right? It's engaging. The way that he describes things is very movie-esque. And there are times where I've had issue with that. I took issue with it in the Tunnel series of seeming to write to movie scenes inside of a novel. I think in this one it works because one of the whole deals about fiction like this and a series like this is that you're supposed to be able to kind of jump into any of the books without having any real knowledge of the other ones and still enjoy it perfectly fine, right? And it's being written for adults, right? Who are generally way less likely to read in general, right? Versus the Tunnel series where you're writing to children and you're in a series in which people have already bought in a huge amount of time once you start writing that way. And there's just so much more like background to know about that tunnel series of like it was supposed to be a movie and then it never happened and all that fun stuff, right? But this being written like movie, I don't take a huge issue with. And I think that is most seen in two different ways, right? It's most seen in his overuse in weird grammatical choices, in italicizing a whole bunch of words that don't need to be italicized, constant use of interrobangs, right? But I think so much of that is this whole thing of, because he's writing to an audience that just doesn't read a whole lot, and this may be the only book that they read in this year, maybe since the last time a Dan Brown book was published, right? Because of that, you need to put it in a way that makes sense to your common reader, right? And so I don't really take offense to that. The second thing that he does a lot is he does go on these kind of roundabout descriptions of where like he'll say something and then there'll be a dash, and then he'll say the same thing like in 2 or 3 different ways, and then go back and then go back to what he was saying originally. And it's just like a strange way of like describing things, but so much of it is like, I'm gonna say something here and then I need as many people to understand what I'm trying to get at without having to take their eyes off this book. And so I'm gonna say it in 2 or 3 different ways, or just like over descriptions, which is very much like I want you to envision this and play this like a movie, and I want you to envision this and play this like a movie in this specific way, right? Which is annoying at times, right? But you know, yeah. Let's see, anything else that's generally around the book before I actually talk about the book, now that I'm 13 minutes into doing this. No, I think that's kind of it for right now. Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's a fun book, right? Super easy read. It's like 700 pages in the way that's published, which is more pages than Paradise Lost, including all the essays, right? And I read this in basically 2 days, and Paradise Lost, without reading the essays, took me like a week, right? And I think that part of it is just how it's written, how much enjoyment I'm getting out of pieces of literature, right? It's also written very airport style, of where it like every chapter is like 5 pages at most, or like, you know, a chapter might be 8 pages, but there's like 3 breaks in it where we switch characters, and so there's a very easy stopping point within the middle of a chapter, right? It's 700 pages long, but 135 chapters, right? So yeah. I think it's another book where we get a lot of twists that I just are like twists for twist's sake, which is always the struggle with I mean, these kind of like action adventure detective type books. There's only so many twists and turns that can be done. What's a way to make this a little bit more unique? I think, and I actually think Dan Brown is definitely a little self-aware of this. Also a little self-aware of like this whole issue that avid readers have in comparison to his novels, of where, right, he's writing populist fiction. And so it's like, there's always an argument that like everything that Dan Brown does and like his final twists are super, super easy to read in the book early. And so I think in this one, he does 2 twists with the same character that I think are like, to me at least, read intentionally like he is trying to show like, I am once at least a little bit ahead of you. And they both involve the character of the Golem. I won't go into the twists, but there's 2 major ones, which, you know, are the twists interesting? Sure. Do they serve a point in the plot? Yes, they do. Right. I'm trying to think. It was like was it Origins, or was it The Lost Symbol, where like there was just so many twists just to have twists. And this one has a few of those. We read from I think too many different characters' perspectives. There's just so many character perspectives that we get attuned to. I think it's a very funny like series of chapters in which we're dealing with the U.S. ambassador to Prague, or to, I can't even, it's Czechoslovakia, Czechia, but the U.S. ambassador in Prague, and like she just keeps getting bad news, and it's this very funny thing that happens for like 5 or 6 chapters straight, of where like she'll get bad news, and then like, I need you to go away, I need 10 minutes, and then she'll join back up with everyone and immediately get another set of bad news and go, I need 10 minutes, you'll go away. And that happens for like 6 chapters straight. It's a very funny little bit. Yeah. I wouldn't say that the book necessarily has anything that's super, super, super interesting to say. I think that like the concepts that he puts forward in this book, right? Because I would say that is the one very good thing about the Dan Brown novels, is that within populist literature and populist fiction, he does a good job in which he's entertaining, but it also attempts to try to introduce concepts, whether they be scientific concepts, morality concepts, religious concepts, and show them to the reader. This one's a little bit heavy-handed, I think, but you know, it still works. I don't think it is anything super, super unique, but that is also coming from someone who is, I would say, relatively in tune with some of the concepts that are in this book, and works with a lot of different people in a lot of different situations, and is very used to like having these concepts of and discussions about how do we think, how do we interact with the world, and how does that change our worldview, that kind of stuff. I think it was also very strange that for such a long time in this book, like, it becomes this huge, long, dragged out process where like he doesn't want to admit that, or like doesn't want to say that it's the CIA that is doing all this stuff and is like hunting Robert Langdon and Catherine Solomon down and causing all these problems. And so like there's probably like 40 chapters in the book, which is kind of like, and you wouldn't he couldn't believe what was typed out on the screen, or you couldn't believe who they were associated with. And it's just like there's like 40 chapters of that, because I don't think we get told until like a chapter in the 70s, I think. So yeah, that's a fun one. I think that's it. I think I'm done talking about Secret of Secrets. I'm not done, actually. I have one more thing. The book does get a little meta at certain points within discussing itself and making jokes about being a bestseller and having the title Secret of Secrets. It feels very reminiscent of some of the ending chapters in the later sections of Tunnels, which I took offense to. I also take offense to these ones because it's like, what are we doing here? So yeah, that was a weird little bit that he also put in there. Yeah, all right. Now I think I'm done talking about the Secret of Secrets.